Hello and welcome to the Sound on Sound podcast about electronic music and all things synth. I'm Cara C, and in this episode I'm talking with Kay, also known as Krust and DJ Krust. Krust was one of the pioneers of drum and bass, which emerged from the city of Bristol in the southwest of England in the late 80s and early 90s. As a DJ, artist, producer, performer, label owner, Kay was very prolific, and many of his releases are considered influential, with classics like Warhead, Soul in Motion and Coded Language, which featured the poet Saul Williams. Kay was part of Roni Size's Represent outfit that won the Mercury Prize in 1997. After a 14-year break from releasing and still aiming for innovation, Krust came back with Edge of Everything in 2020, a more cinematic album on Crosstown Rebels. Let's start with a taste of Krust music. This is an extract from a track called Deep Field of Liars from the aforementioned Edge of Everything. Hello, Kay, better known as DJ Krust. Welcome to the Sound on Sound podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. I'm most keen to represent the jungle and the drum and bass world of electronic music and looking forward to unpacking that with you. You have been described as a master of the genre, so I'm quite interested if we could start with kind of unpacking your journey from the days of Represent and the early days of drum and bass through to where you're at now.
It started way before that for me. You know, I watched a film when I was 14 called Wild Style, and it was about New York hip-hop and how that whole thing started. I was like 14 years old. Me and my brothers and a few friends, we watched it, and it completely blew my mind. You know, I grew up in this, working class council estate. There was nobody like me there, so I didn't have any sort of anyone to look up to, sort of any role models or anything. But when I saw Wild Style, though, it completely changed my life. You know, I saw these guys who looked like me, who didn't look like they had much more than me, but they created something. They were DJing, they were scratching, they were rapping, they were painting. They had this look and this vibe and this feel about them, and I just fell in love with it. And me and my brothers, the next day, we decided we were going to start a crew. We called it Fresh 4. We had like the first general meeting in my mum's front garden. And then we proceeded to ask the school if we could have a room on every 2 weeks after school. And they said yes. And so we started holding, our first sort of, warehouse parties, as it were, in the school classroom. And we took that idea to the local youth club, Equal House in Northwest. And we did the same thing there. We asked them if we could have a back room. We told them what we wanted to do. We wanted to do this new thing called breakdancing and rapping and stuff. And they were like, yeah, sure, go for it. And they let us have the room once a month. And we held parties there.
Awesome.
And then we took the same idea to a squat in Bristol called St. Luke's Road. And there was an old scout hut in the bottom of the garden. And we made a doorway with a sledgehammer and we cleaned it up, swept it up, got our friend Inky and Chaos to come and spray the walls. And we did exactly the same thing now. And so that's kind of how we kind of got our foot in the door of the music game. We kind of just hacked it. We sort of saw what was going on because what was happening in America. At the same time, you had people like Massive Attack, who were called Wild Bunch then. There was a vibrant Bristol scene. You had like FBI, UD4, there was us, Fresh 4. You had John Stapleton, DJ Manford, and it was all about house parties and warehouse parties, and we wanted to be a part of that whole scene. My brother had opportunity, Flynn, he had opportunity to make a record. He had this idea, and he's like, right, we're going to make this track. We're like, really? How are you going to do that? He goes, well, I know these guys like Smith and Mighty. They got a studio, and he's like, I'm going to go knock on the door and ask them to make a track with them. And we're like, wow. So he did it. He went to see him, made this track. That track turned into a track called Wishing on a Star. And that went, we got signed to the majors, to Virgin.
Mm-hmm.
And that track went top 10. we got signed for an album deal, and within like 6 to 8 months we were dropped and we were back to square one because we didn't really have a clue what we were doing. Management wasn't great, and it was like lesson number one. While that was going on, though, we were in London one day. We were being shown the studio, and as the doors opened, the vibe hit me. I saw this massive mixing desk. I saw this glass panel in front. I saw these huge speakers. And, when I saw Wildstar, I had the feeling I knew I was going to do that for the rest of my life. When I saw that studio, I had the exact same feeling. And I knew I was going to learn how to use this equipment. And I was going to do that for the rest of my life. There was no doubt in my mind. And so when I got back to Bristol, my brother had a sampler, a Casio FZ1, like 14 seconds sampling, like 16-bit or 8-bit. It was, but for 3 years I hassled him and lived in his back room until he showed me how to use the sampler so I could fully understand it. While that was going on, I got introduced to Cubase, Atari ST1040, and I just started messing around, trying to make beats, trying to understand what was happening. Really, I mean, there was nothing like it is now. There was, no one was talking about making beats back then. Maybe like a couple of people. Smith and Mighty were the sort of people that I knew who were making music. There was another guy, a guy called LED, who was like a guy who'd make these mixtapes, these cassette mixtapes. They were amazing, and he was really inspiring. But like actually producing, there wasn't many people doing it. From that, I was trying to make hip hop, but it didn't really happen. And then I met Di because he lived down by the squat. So he used to hear the music, and he ended up coming in one afternoon, and I met him. Suv, I'd known for years since we kind of grew up together. So we started hanging out together, making beats in the back of Smith and Mighty's studio. They gave us the studio, we called it Studio B, and it was just like a back room with a soundtracks desk in it and the same Casio FZ1 sampler and a just basic Atari 1014 set of speakers, and that was it. But we lived in that room. We stayed in there as much as possible. We just started to understand how to put sort of beats together. Rave kicked off. We started to go to raves every weekend, and we started to hear this sound. People were calling it jungle techno, and you'd only hear like one or two tunes a night, but it was like this rave tune with the 4 to the floor. But it also had like Hot Pants break running through, or Amen break running through, or Think break running through it. And it was like, wow, what's this? And so that was really the focus of going to these raves. Of course, we were enjoying ourselves and partying, but whenever we heard one of these tunes, we'd run to the decks and try and see, what the record was or see who was playing it. That went on for about a year or so, and we'd come back to the studio and we would tinker around, sort of trying to emulate what we were hearing.
So you were studying it, basically. You were studying. That's what I do. I can't help myself when I'm listening to stuff. I'm like, oh, I like the way they use that rim shot or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we were students. I mean, we did the same thing before when we learned to become scratch DJs and DJs. We would go to St. Paul's Carnival or any of the warehouse parties that we were going on in Bristol at that time, and whoever were playing, we just stand at the front of the decks and just watch how they cut and scratched and stuff. And so this is exactly the same thing, but we were now watching these DJs play this rave stuff and listening for these beats. Eventually we just kind of caught our own vibe, and we were starting to build tracks. We had so much stuff. We decided one day, we were like, right, we need to do something with it. We need to start a label. We need to do something, And Sub says, oh, I know this guy, Roni Size. He wants to start a label as well. I said, great, let's all have a meeting. So we had a meeting. We had a meeting in my flat, and that's kind of when Full Cycle was born. We then lived together for about the next 10 years, and we started to form what everybody considers sort of the Bristol jungle sound. And that was really born out of the Roland 760, the E64, the Roland 550, and the Mackie desk, and NS10s, and then Genelecs. And we just lived in each other's houses and just pushed buttons and experimented. And just after we started our label, Brian G and Jumpy Jack Frost were starting a label. They'd heard about us through a mutual friend. And so because of the work rate that we had back then, we had so much material. We had enough to give to V. We had enough for Full Cycle. We ended up starting another label called Dope Dragon, and then V started another label called Philly Blunt. And basically, for about the first sort of maybe 7-8 years of both those labels, we furnished all of those labels with material through different aliases. We were a machine back then. We just lived and breathed production.
And what about all the other sort of the processing side of things? So like the dynamic control, the EQ, the compression. Did you just learn all that yourselves as well? Just worked it out?
There was none of that.
Okay.
There was none of that. The only EQs and compressions we understood was red light.
Yeah.
And the Mackie desk was great for distortion. So what we were using in the beginning, it was Cubase and the Roland. So we knew enough to sort of not sort of boost too many levels here and there, but there was no shelving, there was no EQing, there was no compression. It was just all going through the Mackie desk, coming straight out of the sampler we separated it through the 8 tracks at the back of the sampler, straight into 8 tracks on the Mackie desk. And then we'd use the Mackie bus section as well to actually push more of the levels. There's no shelving. There was no kick drums shelved at 100 hertz, anything like that, or 110. There was no shelving for the bass. It was just everything came through the channels. And we just balanced everything.
From source.
Yeah, you just balanced it and you just listened to it. We eventually started getting there. But in the beginning, those first, maybe, I don't know, those first couple of records you heard, it was just like, they were quite raw and sort of rugged tunes. I mean, you knew enough to let the kick drum and the sub bass breathe. So you'd figure out a way to balance those, or maybe shove off a little bit at the low end so the kick drum could breathe. But it's nothing like it is now. It wasn't as clinical as it was now. It's really vibes. It's really about vibes. And there's loads of. We'll probably get into it in the conversation. But what we created was a system of making jungle music. So we made a system of in the arrangements, in the sound, in the way the beats worked. We really dug deep and figured out how to make this sound really work as a sound, because we were the very first DJ producers. Because back then you were either a DJ or you were a producer. There were very few people who were both. We came in with a totally new idea, with a totally fresh approach to production and performing, because what we realized before then, if you bought a record, it was generally from a producer who wasn't a DJ, so he didn't understand what it was like to DJ in front of an audience with only a certain amount of time to mix a track in. So the intros will always be off, the timing on the intros, the length of the intros. And if you had to cut that onto a dub plate, the dub plate would, on because there were these thick pieces of acetate, the intro would wear away because you had to cue it up.
Yeah.
So unless you had a clear one, like the clear one starting point, the mix would always come in off key. And because the plates were heavy, you couldn't necessarily slow them down the way you could at CDJ or vinyl. So you had to learn a different style of mixing with dub plates. So what our thing was, right, we're DJing. We need to master a form that still entertains the crowd and helps us create a track that's still original, but was also a tool, because that's what it needed to be. It needed to work as a tool in the set. And so basically what we figured out was you need certain length of an intro so that the drums would mix in, or the hi-hat would mix in, or if you had a string or a sound, there was something measurable so that all of our tunes would fit together. So we figured out we would have these set ways of making our tunes, clean out the back end, no funny sounds or off-key pads or anything. Front ends would be, really simple, no, some bass would sometimes there'd be bass in it, sometimes there weren't, sometimes it'd be clean drums, sometimes it'd be a hi-hat. And so basically we constructed our tracks so that it didn't matter who made them, they would fit together like a jigsaw. And then that way, when anyone would play them, we knew exactly where the mix point would come in. You know exactly when the bass would come in. You know exactly when to drop the track. You know exactly how long to mix the track. and that completely revolutionized the sound. And to the degree today, it's become sterile. It's too formulaic now. But that formula worked in the beginning, because before that, the music was really chaotic. Like jungle music, and what you hear back in the early 90s was that crazy sound. And in the beginning, it was fine. You could mix a couple of them, but we needed to kind of create some kind of order, because it was just becoming too difficult to mix. And then if you couldn't mix them, you couldn't perform properly. Then you can't be up there trying to figure out how to mix two tunes. You didn't have that time.
Yeah, and it needs that momentum, it needs that energy and all that. So it's almost like being aware of the mechanical, having an overview of how the experience works if you're listening to a set, basically.
It's a finely tuned machine performing. You've only got seconds, and it's all instinctual. So you don't have time to figure out what's the next tune. It's about impact. It's about excitement. It's about creating a story and a journey. And to do that, the preparation needs to be on point.
And so what about hardwares and samples, and how did you create your sound palette back then, especially?
So we basically were sample kings. We came from the hip hop era where it was all about sampling. We would camp out in secondhand shops. So we would just go to secondhand shops and just listen to loads and loads of records and just buy us. And when we started to go to other countries and touring and stuff, we just had to promote. As soon as we stopped anywhere, we go to the promoter, take us to even before we go to the hotel, take us to the record shop. And we just go straight to the record shop and just buy breaks. And that's all we were looking for: breaks, and more breaks. And so then we started to buy secondhand equipment, or whatever was in the secondhand shops, like music shops. We started getting fascinated by the whole sound of the 70s. Classic Moogs, ARPs, Salinas, Korgs. Anything that could just give us the edge of the sound. And then we wherever we go, we just buy drum machines, anything that had a sound to it. We just spent hours in secondhand shops. And I remember one of our favorite shops was in LA, Black Market, I think it was called, on La Brea. And that was a treasure trove. It's like this archive. You walk into a warehouse, it just had that musky smell of like old equipment. We loved it. And we just used to go in there and just spend like hours in there, just playing on the drum machines and playing keyboards, and then just, buying a few pieces.
And transporting them back wasn't a problem in those days?
No.
Right.
I mean,
nice.
we'd be on tour or something. So the tour manager would just wrap it up for us and send it. By the time we finish the tour, it'd be waiting for us when we get back. Or we'd, sometimes it'd be small enough that we could take it on as hand luggage or something.
Yeah, I started producing in the late 90s on virtually no budget, and it was amazing how I remember someone assumed I had money because I had an array of hardware, but actually everything came secondhand. And Sound on Sound Reader's Ads was one of the places, but apart from that, I was also just as you say, just looking around and finding things with interesting sounds. So in a sense, I don't know, is it a bit those days are over? That was a good time for that, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think those times are coming back. I can definitely see in lots more of my peers buying hardware again and trying to make music outside of the box. And I'm definitely being pushed that way. I got my MPC out the other day, and the floppy disk is this is it now. I've got my ARP Odyssey out, and that all the faders need to be clean. And so I think, in a way, we've gone through these cycles. I remember a conversation we had one time when we were all using Cubase and Atari ST 1040, and it was brilliant. We were doing some amazing stuff on it, and all of a sudden Pro Tools came out, and we all switched to Pro Tools. And I remember about 10 years later, we were like, there was nothing wrong with what we were doing. We just rushed on this technology thing and jumping on this thing, jumping on that thing. And it's like now everyone says you got to compress your sound, you got to do this EQ level, da da da. And it's like, I don't really just do any of that stuff. Like Warhead, one of my biggest tunes, no compression, minimal EQ, just turn up, made on a 6-track soundtracks desk. It's like, Soul Emotion, one of the most complex tunes I ever made. Same thing, Mackie desk. Took a month to make though.
Yeah.
But no elaborate EQing or compression, nothing like that at all.
I think in a way there's something to be said for that, getting it right at source, because there's some tracks where I don't actually need, surely I should be EQing this more, surely I should be doing this, and you're like, well, no, actually the palette is right and the palette is balanced, and you can start to think of that when as you're building it, don't you? You factor that in, and I think there's something that's a bit of a strength in that regard.
Well, we would spend a great deal of time in preparation mode, and so that stuck with me. We would have days of going out hunting, so we would just go on missions. We'd go to all the secondhand shops in Bristol, and we'd just live in those for 2 or 3 days, and we would just buy samples, buy records, and just that would be it. And then we'd have these marathon sampling sessions where we would just sit down in a room, and just sample these, play records, and then listen. And that's where I kind of we got our musical education as well, like listening to all these different types of records, prog rock, heavy metal, breaks, jazz, funk, soul, R&B, classical. You'd just be sitting there listening to his music all day, and then sample that, sample that. And then as you're sampling it, we put it on the keyboard. And so one of the differences between what's going on back then and today is like everything went into the sampler first, and everything had its own key group. So drums had their own patch, and on those drums you'd work the drums. So as you're sampling and you're editing the drums, you're working them so that you find the right ones that work together. Put this snare drum with these breaks, with that, put a loop on there, forward, backwards. Then let's put a LFO on there so it sounds like it's an actual break. And there's all these like little tricks that we did that were making the sound, So there wasn't necessarily, a need to sort of EQ the hell out of it. The speakers told us everything. If you pressed something that it was supposed to be a high frequency and the speakers are flapping, well, there's a frequency in it that shouldn't be in there. Take it out. It was just all really organic and really all simple. But that process took us, years and years to figure out. So, the whole thing really was about the prep, because in the preparation, that's where you made your sound. And so that's where you were sculpting the sound. So we did a lot of the sculpting in the sampler, in the Roland. So we used a lot of the filters to shelve off all the highs or all the lows. And that kind of gave you the basic foundations. The Mackie desks had a great saturation to them anyway. So once you got it up into the red, it just gave you that early jungle sound. If you think about a track called, Freak Show, probably that's one of the best mixes I ever did. And that was just all in the levels, and a little bit of EQ. I didn't really understand shelving, so I'm probably boosting more than shelving on that track. But because of the sound choice, it didn't need much. It was just, you could hear it. You could just hear it in the mix with what it needed. And it was just like, it was more than anything, it's just turn it up.
You talk about having like a 14-year gap before you came back with an album more recently, The Edge of Everything. Yeah, what was going on there?
Life caught up from 14 to 37. That was the sort of cycle of music. I'd lived a life in the spotlight and, locally, and then nationally, and then internationally. And, after a while, life caught up. I had to slow down. I was living on the road. I didn't really have much of a social life. Couldn't hold a relationship down. I didn't see my family much. I had a great career, but personal life was shot. My health was pretty much shot. And I just realized, one day I woke up in one of our clubs in Bristol, like literally sort of came to, and it was like, is this all there is? Is this it? Is this it? Is this what I've worked all my life for? This is what I've sacrificed, my family, my child, relationships. This is it. And I kind of said to myself, you know what? Nah, I don't want to do this anymore. And then within about 8 months, I'd left the business. I left Full Cycle. I kind of took a step back from the whole jungle thing, DJing thing. And then it sort of, everything crashed down quite quickly after that. And then I just rebuilt myself. I kind of looked at what was going on in my life. I looked at how I created what I created. I looked at why I was feeling so unhappy and, so low self-esteem, the whole thing. And it was a huge, it was a breakdown, but it was a breakdown so I could break through. I didn't really recognize it at the time because it was really insurmountable and I didn't have any sort of language for it. But it was, at the time, it was a huge departure from the life that I'd created. And there was a lot of worry and anxiety and stress at who I was going to be if I wasn't Krust. How am I going to make a living? And I think that was going on for quite a while before I actually made the decision, because you don't just leave your business. It was like, it was my baby. Do you know what I mean? I'd created it, and I was in a relationship with Roni, Sub and Di. They were my family. And that was a really hard decision to walk away from those guys and that lifestyle and the community that we built. We built the jungle community, the first version of it, with Brian Frost and Fabio Groove Rider, Goldie, and that was family, and to walk away from that was devastating. But I knew with the personality type that I was, if I didn't, it would have been a lot worse. And so I decided to look after myself, take care of myself. And that was the best thing that I ever did. And it took 10 years to really figure that out. But once I did, the real me came back online and I started to wake up and realize, okay, there's this K character now, and I rebranded myself as K, and then it was like create that new identity. That was the whole idea around the Adapt the Canvas brand right now, is because I went through the transformation myself. I saw what it was about. I feared it, I saw it for what it was. I'd faced the beast and I'd came out the other side and I was a better version of myself. And, people could see that. People were seeing that. They were coming up to me and saying, look, something different about you. What's going on? And I would talk to them. And I could see that there was something in it. And so there was my next light bulb moment. And it was like, boom, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life now. And so I started to really dive deeper into the whole mindset, consciousness, spirituality, meditation, health and wellness. Started reading a lot more business books, started to take that more serious, marketing. And then I just combined them all into this, what I call adapter mentality now. It's just being like a pioneer, like a hacker, really. It's the same thing about learning how to do jungle music or hip hop. You're just looking at all the elements around you and figuring out how you can, adapt and create something new. And so the transformation creative consultancy was no different. It was like, I always say when I do my talks or workshops, I'm still performing. I just don't do it behind the decks anymore. And so that was really about me saving myself, helping myself, and then introducing people to that along the way.
So after studying the music, it's like almost things got out of balance. So then you studied how to be human and came back with both.
Well, yeah. I mean, you got to imagine back then it's like you just do this. There was no meditation. If there was, it was very, very, it was just considered hippie-ish if you were meditating. God forbid you were drinking green tea and doing yoga, you just would have been thrown out of the whole scene. It just wasn't talked about. And, it was like, it was go. And when you can't go anymore, go some more. And what's really powerful with driving the Adapt the Canvas brand right now is because of that. I actually know now I'm helping creators who are reaching that transformation stage in their lives or feeling like they're being burnt out. Here is the system to solve that problem.
Yeah, I don't know if you've heard of Help Musicians here in the UK. They've got a Music Minds Matter, and they've really started focusing on that more, which I think is great that exists, because there's a lot of that support is not there, or just as you say, the acknowledgement really of the stresses and strains of success in that sense, and just what goes with the territory of electronic music in terms of the working hours and all that kind of thing. Yeah, interesting. Well, yeah, well done you for working all that out and now of service to others. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
So that's your Adapt the Canvas work.
Yes.
And people just sign up for courses or programs that you offer?
Yeah, so we have a free community. That's the starting point. So anyone can join that. I'll give you the links for that. So you can come on there. We do. There's a free course on there, 2 free courses on there, which just helps people kind of get a start in the creative industries. I help plan out what it is that they're trying to do, and then we plan out your first 90 days. And then it scales up. We have a paid monthly course, and then we have a paid yearly course for creators who are ready for that transformation. So that's really for sort of industry professionals who are feeling like they need the transformation, and they've been in a career and they want to go to the next level, or they want to transition out of that into something else. They might have a business idea that they're struggling with. They might have a business idea that they want to launch. So the big package, the year-long course called Elevation Formula, that really helps them. I guide them for a year through that, help them get clear on what it is that they want to do, help them sort of get the product together, and then launch it into the world.
Awesome. Cool. So can we get under the hood, a bit of nuts and bolts about jungle drum and bass production? I'm not a drum and bass jungle producer. I love it. And therefore, when I listen to it, I hear quite a compact sound. It's complex. You've got the obviously solid, are they layered, the kicks and the snares, but then you've also got the intricate percussion, that all that lovely kind of, I hear it as quite sort of loose, interesting, whatever timing and polyrhythms and all that kind of thing. You've also got the atmosphere, you've got the synths are obviously a massive part of it, sounding quite abstract, and sort of quite weird sounds. Everyone almost is trying to find their sound, their voice, with a lot of overdrive, a lot of sawtooth use is what I'm hearing. What would you say is going on?
I think probably the best way would be to break down one of my tracks, I guess, something like maybe some of the music on the last album, At the Edge of Everything. So my approach to that project was really a lot of research in the beginning. So I looked at what was I trying to accomplish. For me, one of the greatest periods of music was the 70s. And so I started there. I said, right, I'm going to go out. I bought the Silverface 1176 Yuri compressor and the E-Series SSL compressor and a Neve mic pre and for the vocal chain. And so most of everything what I got went through there. I already had a Moog D Model D. I already had the ARP Odyssey, and I had an ARP Selena string ensemble, a Roland OR organ, Roland V synth as well. So I kind of set my room up around that type of keyboard setup, and I used a couple of old vintage pedals. And then really what I did was I set about making my sound. So I said, what's the sound of this album? What is it that I'm trying to accomplish? I meditated and I wrote and I journaled and I kind of watched documentaries and I tried to understand what was the theme of this album. And I wrote down loads of words and I stuck them all on a wall with loads of pictures, and I ended up having this wall which ended up looking like a collage. And really, I just sat there for about nearly 2 years meditating and visualizing and thinking about what this project was supposed to be about. What is the message that I want to get across? What do I want to say? What do I want to talk about? And really, the whole thing was about reinvention, was about my rebirth. I'd been in music, released a project for 14 years. So I thought I had something to talk about. And the whole thing about the edge of everything was this sense that we are on the edge of something new, something different. I remember growing up in the 70s, early 80s, and there was a crisis every 6 months. It seemed the heat wave's going to melt the planet, and then it died down. And then it was the miners' strike, and then it died down. And it was the oil. And it seemed like you had plenty of time between these crises to sort of get back to normal, go back to school, play football in the fields, and then all of a sudden, there'd be another crisis. And it just seemed like today, and when I started writing, I realized these crises are just every day now. Every time you pick up your phone, there's a crisis. It's something new's happening. There wasn't any time to get a reprieve from the last one. before you even sort of come to terms to the one you're already dealing with, another one would hit, and then another one, another one. So throughout the day, it'd be pure murder, death, kill. And so I thought, this is interesting. We are in this position where everything feels like it's on the edge of everything. And so that was the whole idea around talking about that. But really, it's like, what do you do about it? You know, what's the solution? And so I started to write this music talking about the journey of going into the self, because though, from my standpoint, I was thinking, I'm the one causing this in my life. So I'm the one that's going to be able to solve it. And so you have to go on your own hero's journey to be able to understand, the chaos that you're creating and how that's being reflected in your environment, in the world, and in other people. So that's what the story was. I said, right, great, I got the story. Then I sat down with all the synths and I started to sculpt the sounds. And so I would spend a day with like the Moog in a pedal and have that going into the desk, into Pro Tools. And I would just mess around until I found the sound that resembled one of the titles or one of the words or one of the ideas that I was looking for. So I spent about 6 to 8 months really going through all of the sounds and setting the room up, setting all my synths up, setting all my drum machines up, setting all my pedals up, setting all the filters up, the effects, the EQs, everything, until I had this consistent sound. I had all my presets that I'd made, everything I'd made, my sample packs, my drum packs, my synth packs, everything. It was like, all in their own folders, ready to go. So anytime when I had an idea for a track, boom, I'd go straight to my library and I'd go straight to my drums. I'd go straight to my synths. I'd go straight to my basses and I would work from there. And then that was like the first layer of the palettes. So then I would do sketches. I did loads and loads of sketches. I did about 100 sketches, maybe 150 sketches. And they were like these 16 to 32 bar loops. And they just lived on one timeline. So on one timeline, I had about 100 and odd loops, and I would just listen to them every day and add to them and take away, and I would just go through them. And so how I set up my channels, I set up with the Waves NLS. So they're the NLS plugins. They are the summon plugins from Waves. So they're incredible. So I put that on every track. And then on the master bus, you have like the mixer that you can select. But if you put that on all of your channels straight away, like the Yohad Nevo is good for the drums, the mic something that's good for sort of bass, and the Spike Stent one's good for sort of bass and drums as well. So that went on. So on top of that, I put the SSL saturator, and then set up all the effects. So I had like 10 racks of effects, and then I would have the mix auxiliaries as well. So then I would have everything coming out of the main channels, side chained into the auxiliaries, then coming out of the auxiliaries into their subsections as well. And those subsections would have all the same NLSs again, but they would have some sort of distortions. Some tracks would have like EQs, filters, more saturators. And then that would be the way that I would work. So I'd mix everything. And so this was rough. There was no EQing going on there. Some shelving. So obviously some basses and kick drums would need to be shelved. So I would shelve, but there was no radical high, cuts and shelves and notches, nothing like that. Really, it was it was quick and dirty just to get the sound in and sculpting. So that would all go through, and then I would use that to color the sound some more. And then at the end, I would bounce it down to 2 tracks. So then I would then come back to the original loops again. And then, so I'd have this loop section. I'd be making my own loops and with my own sounds. So it'd be like this flywheel. So then by the end of 6 months, everything that was being played live would be replaced by samples, and then I would go again. I would use the same tracks that had the saturators and the NLS channels, put everything back through that so it would give us a double saturated sound, and then I would just continue to do that So that's how that sort of album sounds, like as rich as it does. It's just this process of going around and around and around. And if you combine those with, like, you know, all the analog outboard stuff, you start to get this really fully woolly, fuzzy, sort of analogy, warm sound. And the NLSs of natural, they had the natural sort of crunch and compression in them. I don't compress my sound. I use compression as a volume or coloring. So I don't slam into it. I don't slam limiters either. I don't use those in my music. I just use them for color or for volume, and effects as well. So if there's something that needs something like that, I will use it to give it an effect. Maybe I'll crush a hi-hat, or maybe I'll over compress a kick drum, but it's not my sound. I won't use it in my sound. And this whole album was mixed down by Joker as well. So that's not a thing that I'm pursuing right now at this stage of my career. I'm not interested in mixing. I'm just interested in creating a palette and sculpting sound. And then I'm quite happy to pass it on to someone else to mix these days.
Yeah, so looking at the current kind of ecology for the drum and bass jungle breaks kind of world. See, obviously I noticed there's loads more women coming through, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, in terms of mainstream as well, you know, Naya Archives was mentioning you guys when she was nominated for a Mercury Prize. So yeah, where do you think it's all at the moment? What's your thoughts on that?
I think it's an interesting place. I think there's 2 or 3 things that's happening that are going to shape the next 10 years. One is definitely the state of the industry as it is now. That's compounded by the overall music industry and how that's shifting and where that's going to land in the next 10 years. You've got a huge technological, I wouldn't say effect, but you know, you're going to have a huge technological shift that's going to drive the economics of the business in a whole new way. And then you have just the way that we are performing and what DJing is becoming and what live shows are becoming. And yeah, it's really starting to saturate the mainstream as well. I think if we tackle what jungle's doing now, it's definitely becoming a hybrid of itself in a way. And that's really interesting, the way that it's mutating and it's changing. You've got so many different facets in it. The half speed, the neurofunk and the jungle, the jump up. These are becoming established sounds, and they're becoming even more kind of niche sounds of the original sound itself. And the new audiences are finding it, and they're doing their spin on it. Manufacturers and people who are making the technology are recognizing what jungle is and how people are using those synths and those samples and those sounds, and are now catering for it, which is going to expand it more and open it up to another audience, which is interesting. I think the business and the way that technology is changing the entertainment industry as a whole, the dismantling of the music business, that's what I'm seeing. And I'm seeing it being rebuilt in a new form. And I know a lot of people want to preserve the music business and, you know, keep music, whatever. It's like, I don't think that's the right idea. The way that technology is used in music is one of the most advanced in any industry. And to try and keep it, as it was 20 years ago, I think that's the mistake. And I think because of the way that the music business is and the heritage of it and historic nature of the way that it's run, I think that will start to erode, and you'll have a new generation who really thinks differently about how to market, how to express themselves through the music and what brand is, what story is. I think that is what's changing, and I think that is what's allowing a new generation to come in and not be encumbered by the old ways of thinking, not become encumbered by the old attitude, how you get your sound out and what your sound is. That's no longer being informed by the gatekeepers. and that's really, really huge. That's really, really different because it's no longer guarded by the gatekeepers. The sound now has gone wild, and anybody now who can, put a sample pack together can make that sound and, put anything on top of it, vocals or, classical music, and people will listen to it. It's now a mainstream sound, and the flip side of that is that sometimes dilutes the sound. Sometimes that dilutes the culture, and that's what's happened as well. So you still have the roots of the culture, which are, the nightclubs, which are Sun and Bass, which are, the metalheads, the Rams, the V records, the gutter funks, and but then you're seeing a whole subsection of that splitting off and doing its own thing. Where it's going to end up, we'll just go back to the melting pot. We're already seeing jungle making a resurgence. We're seeing a clear separation between drum and bass and jungle and all the other subgenres and variations of that. And it feels like there's a definite pull and push towards, a resurgence of that jungle sound, but been brought more up to date technology-wise, but with the same roots and the same ethos. And that's interesting. You've got your purists out there who still want to keep it pure, but you've kind of got your new generation who just remind me of what we were doing when we started that, because our thing was we were trying to be hip-hop heads or we were trying to make rave, but we veered into making a hybrid of all of those things, and that's what they call jungle. This is what's happening now. That's what's really exciting. And so there's a huge drive now for the recognition of the craft and the art again. And that's where I think, the hardware is coming back, because people now know that we don't need to be on a conveyor belt. We don't need to compete with, last week's release. We can now slow down and get back to making art, back to making music, back to the craft. And as such, we can put the value back into it. And what Web3 is going to do is going to allow people to use the blockchain technology to create smaller limited runs of music or art or craft or whatever it is that they're doing. And I think this is one of the use cases of NFTs. We use the NFTs to create limited runs of the stuff that we're doing. So we won't be selling an NFT, we'll be selling a limited edition Krust 12 that there is only 100 of. And we use the NFT as like a watermark. So that, in that sense, then we'll be bringing the art back. People will know that they've got a limited run because we could see it. It's on the blockchain, and it costs £100 for that limited run, rather than loads and loads and loads. Well, let's get back to how it used to be. There used to be like 300 presses or 2,000 presses, And then when people wanted more, the artist then decided whether they want to do more, but they might not as well. So that's not down to the distributions or the streaming services. That comes down to a decision from the creator of the art, how it used to be. So I think we're returning back to something that we all love and respect, value for the craft, and making sure that the artist or the creator of the art form is properly valued and compensated. We're just figuring out how to use the technology to be able to accomplish that.
Cool. Any current or upcoming projects you'd like to tell us about?
Yes, so we have the new Wonder Palace compilation coming next year, and it's going to be about 18 to 20 brand new pieces of music. And that's going to be accompanied by some new merchandise and some new goodies I don't want to talk too much about, but some interesting stuff that people can be able to collect and stuff. So that's really exciting. And apart from that, really, it's all the new coaching stuff is really, really starting to take off. And I'm doing more talks, more workshops. Yeah, and I'm available for talks and workshops as well. So people out there are interested in booking Adapt the Canvas for workshops for your company, for your brand, for your uni, for your college, and one-on-ones, then yeah, I'm available.
Wonderful. Well, it's lovely to hear more about your work. Long may your adventures in sound and music and life continue.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening, and be sure to check out the show notes for further information, as well as links and details of other episodes in the electronic music series. And just before you go, let me point you to soundonsound.com/podcasts so you can check out what's on our other channels. This has been a Caro C production for Sound on Sound.